Sometimes the past refuses to stay buried, no matter how deep you think it's been laid to rest. And sometimes it takes a loyal dog to uncover what changes everything. Eli Banner is a silver-haired cowboy living his final years in Dustwater, with only his hound, Whiskey, for company. When Whiskey digs up a rotting wagon beneath an oak tree, what's inside stuns the town. Thousands in stolen cash from a heist that left 3 men dead and the community cursed with suspicion for decades. Now neighbors emerge with claims, old grudges resurface, and buried greed comes back to life. What will one aging cowboy do when the whole town wants what his dog found? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin sat at the edge of Dustwater like an afterthought. Weathered gray planks blending into the Montana landscape as if the building itself was trying to disappear. Eli Banner had lived there for 12 years, ever since the bank took his ranch, and in that time he'd made his peace with smaller things. A roof that mostly didn't leak, a wood stove that kept the worst of winter at bay, a porch where he could sit with his coffee and watch the sun come up over hills that used to be his. He was 67 now, silver-haired and lean in the way men get when they've worked hard all their lives and then suddenly stopped. Not frail exactly, but no longer solid. The kind of body that remembers strength without quite possessing it anymore. His hands still bore the calluses of ranch work, even though it had been 5 years since he'd held a rope or mended a fence line that mattered. 5 years since Sarah died. He didn't talk about that much. Didn't see the point. The people in Dustwater who'd known her were kind enough not to ask, and the handful of folks who'd moved to town afterward didn't know there was anything to ask about. Cancer had taken her in the spring, which somehow made it worse, watching the world come back to life while she faded from it. She'd been 58. They'd been married 34 years. The ranch went 6 months later. Medical bills had eaten through their savings like termites through old wood, and the mortgage payments he'd missed during her final months piled up until the bank sent a man in a suit who couldn't look Eli in the eye. They'd offered him this cabin as part of the settlement, a property the county had seized for back taxes in the 60s. Nobody wanted it. Eli took it because he didn't have the energy to look for anywhere else. Whiskey had been Sarah's last gift to him. She'd arranged it without telling him, knowing he'd try to talk her out of spending money they didn't have. The dog showed up 3 weeks before she passed. A blue-tick hound pup from her cousin's farm, all ears and paws and boundless enthusiasm. She'd smiled at Eli's protests, her face already hollowed by illness, and said, "You'll need someone to talk to when I'm gone. May as well be someone who doesn't argue back." The pup was 7 now, graying around the muzzle like his owner, content to spend his days following Eli through the woods or sleeping by the stove. Eli had named him Whiskey, not because he drank, he didn't, but because Sarah used to say his eyes were the color of good bourbon in lamplight. The dog wore a worn leather collar with her initials carved inside, SMB, Sarah Marie Banner. Eli checked that collar every morning, running his thumb over the letters like a prayer. Dustwater itself was dying, the slow death small towns die when the highway bypasses them and the young people leave. Population hovered around 170, though that number dropped every year. Main Street had 6 buildings still in use: Dutch Hammond's General Store, the Post Office, May Cortland's Sheriff's Substation, the Dustwater Diner, a gas station, and the First Baptist Church. Everything else stood empty, windows dark and doors locked against a future that had stopped coming decades ago. Eli's morning routine rarely varied. Up at dawn, coffee on the stove, Whiskey let out to do his business while Eli stood on the porch and breathed in the cold air. Montana in October was his favorite time. The aspens turning gold, the air sharp enough to remind you that you were alive. Then he'd walk into town, Whiskey trotting beside him. To Dutch's store for supplies or just conversation. Dutch Hammond was 63, a broad man with a white beard and hands that could palm a basketball. He'd run the general store for 40 years, taking over from his father, and knew every soul in Dustwater, plus most of their business. He was fair, mostly honest, and had a dry sense of humor that surfaced when you least expected it. This particular morning, Eli pushed through the store's door to the familiar jingle of the bell overhead. Dutch stood behind the counter, sorting through a box of canned goods, and looked up with a nod. "Eli, the usual?" "Just coffee if you've got a pot on." Dutch gestured to the pot in the back. Eli poured himself a cup, dropped $2 on the counter. Dutch always waved him off. Eli always left the money anyway, and leaned against the wall near the wood stove, where a couple of other regulars sat. Carl Brennan occupied the chair nearest the fire. He was pushing 80, thin as a rail, with liver-spotted hands that trembled slightly when he lifted his own coffee cup. Carl had lived in Dustwater his entire life. His daughter Hannah looked after him now that his memory was starting to slip. "Morning, Carl," Eli said. Carl blinked at him, took a moment to place the face, then smiled. "Eli, how's that hound of yours? Getting old like the rest of us? Aren't we all?" Carl stared into his coffee. "Aren't we all?" The third person in the store was May Cortland, Dustwater's part-time deputy sheriff. She covered 3 towns on a rotating schedule, spending 2 days a week in Dustwater unless something came up. May was 54, compact and efficient, with short grey hair and eyes that missed very little. She'd been in law enforcement for 30 years, starting as a dispatcher and working her way up. Eli respected her. She didn't waste words, and she didn't suffer fools. "Eli," she said, glancing up from the clipboard she was reviewing, "you hear about the Hendersons' fence? Heard something got into their chickens. Mountain lion, probably. Fish and Wildlife sending someone out to track it." She made a notation on her clipboard. "You still have that rifle of yours?" "In the cabin. Keep it handy. Not saying we've got a problem, but better safe than sorry." Eli nodded. The conversation drifted to other small matters: the early snow forecast, the price of heating oil, whether the diner would stay open through winter. It was the kind of talk that filled small-town mornings. Words exchanged not for their content, but for their familiarity. These were people who'd lived their whole lives in close quarters, who knew each other's routines and troubles, who showed up when someone needed help and stayed quiet when someone needed space. Eli had never quite fit into that. He'd grown up 2 counties over, met Sarah at a county fair, worked ranches across Montana before settling down. Even after 3 decades in the area, he'd always been a little bit outside, a little bit apart. Sarah had been the bridge between him and community. Without her, he'd drifted back to the edges. He finished his coffee, said his goodbyes, and headed out with whiskey. They walked the dirt road that led past the old church and into the woods beyond. This was Eli's favorite part of the day, just him and the dog, and the quiet of trees that had been growing since before his grandfather was born. The woods ran for miles, public land that nobody bothered with, except hunters during deer season. Eli knew the paths by heart now. The creek that ran clear and cold even in summer. The meadow where elk sometimes grazed at dawn. The old oak grove, where the trees grew thick and gnarled, their roots breaking through the earth like arthritic fingers. Whiskey loved these walks, nose to the ground following scents only he could detect. Squirrels chattered warnings from high branches. Ravens called to each other in voices that sounded almost human. Eli walked with his hands in his pockets, his breath forming small clouds in the morning chill. He'd been thinking about Sarah more than usual lately. Not the final months, he tried not to dwell there, but the good years. The way she'd looked when they were young, hair black as a crow's wing, laugh that could fill a room. How she'd handled the hard years when the ranch struggled, never complaining, always finding a way to stretch what little they had. She'd been stronger than him in all the ways that mattered. The collar around Whiskey's neck caught the light as they walked, the worn leather dark with age and wear. Eli reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears, feeling the warm fur, the steady presence of the only companion he had left. He thought about what Dutch had mentioned the week before, casual-like about the town's history. They'd been talking about nothing in particular when Dutch brought up the old bank robbery, the one that happened before Eli moved to the area. 3 people killed, Dutch had said. Money never recovered. 4 men suspected but never charged. It had torn the town apart, families turning on each other, suspicion poisoning everything for years afterward. Eli hadn't paid much attention at the time. Old tragedies weren't his concern, and he had enough of his own without borrowing from the past. But something about the story stuck with him. Maybe it was the idea that some wounds never really heal. They just scar over and wait. Whiskey stopped suddenly, ears perked, nose working the air. Then he bolted toward the oak grove, running with the kind of energy Eli hadn't seen in years. "Whiskey! Here, boy!" But the dog was gone, crashing through the underbrush, barking with excitement. Eli sighed and followed, pushing through low branches, his boots crunching on fallen leaves. October wood smelled like earth and decay. The good kind of decay that meant things breaking down to feed what came next. He found Whiskey at the base of the largest oak, the one with the split trunk that made it look like two trees had grown together. The dog was digging furiously, dirt flying, that hunting instinct that lived in his blood taking over completely. "What have you got there? Squirrel?" But even as Eli said it, he knew it wasn't a squirrel. Whiskey was digging too deep, too focused. Eli knelt down, his knees protesting, and peered into the hole the dog had started. Something was down there. Something that wasn't soil or stone. Old, rotted wood that crumbled when Eli touched it. He pulled Whiskey back, the dog whined in protest, and started digging himself, using his hands to clear away the loose earth. The wood came into focus, planks, deliberately placed, buried. His heart began to beat a little faster. You didn't bury wood planks 6 feet under an oak tree by accident. Eli stood up, looked around the grove. Nothing but trees and shadows, and the sound of wind moving through branches. He was alone except for Whiskey, who sat panting, tail wagging, proud of his discovery. "All right, boy," Eli said quietly. "Let's see what we've got." He had a feeling, standing there with dirt under his fingernails and the dog looking up at him with brown eyes full of simple joy, that this moment was a hinge point. That whatever lay beneath those planks was going to change things in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But he was 67 years old and long past the age where he ran from difficult truths. So he kept digging, clearing away the earth, revealing more of what had been hidden for longer than most folks in Dustwater had been alive. The sun climbed higher through the trees, painting the grove in shades of amber and gold, and Eli Banner uncovered the past with his bare hands. One careful scoop at a time, the planks ran deeper than Eli expected. What he'd thought might be an old storage crate or forgotten toolbox turned out to be something much larger. He dug for 20 minutes, clearing earth from what was clearly a collapsed structure, before he saw the metal, corroded green with age, but unmistakable. A plate riveted to what remained of wooden siding. Eli brushed away the dirt, squinting at the faded lettering. First Bank of Dustwater. His hands went still. He sat back on his heels, heart hammering now, and looked at Whiskey. The dog cocked his head, tail still wagging, oblivious to the weight of what he'd found. "Lord have mercy," Eli whispered. He knew what this was. Everyone in Dustwater over a certain age knew. The bank wagon that disappeared in 1962. The one that left 3 people dead and a town drowning in suspicion. They'd searched for months, law enforcement, volunteers, even brought in dogs. Never found a trace. The prevailing theory had been that the robbers dumped it in the river 20 miles north. Let the current carry it away. But here it was, 6 feet under an oak tree. Close enough to town that you could walk there in an hour. Eli's mind raced. He should stop digging. He should go get May right now. Let the authorities handle this properly. But his hands were already moving again, clearing more dirt, driven by a curiosity he couldn't quite name. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he just needed to see for himself. The wagon had collapsed in on itself, the wooden frame rotted through in places. But the iron reinforcements held, creating a kind of cage around what lay inside. Eli worked carefully now, aware that he was disturbing what might be evidence. His fingers touched metal again, different this time. Smooth, deliberate, manufactured, a vault, the bank's vault, small and portable, designed to be transported in the wagon. The door hung askew on broken hinges, forced open by roots that had grown through the gap over the course of 6 decades. Nature had done what no locksmith could have managed. Cracked it open slow and patient year by year. Eli reached inside, his hand trembling slightly. His fingers closed on something wrapped in oilcloth, surprisingly intact given how long it had been buried. He pulled it free and unwrapped it carefully. Money, bundles of bills, old denominations, some stuck together with moisture and decay, but clearly identifiable. He pulled out another bundle, then another. The vault wasn't large, but it was packed full. Cash, bonds with official seals, bank documents in sealed envelopes that had somehow survived. Eli sat there in the dirt, surrounded by evidence of a crime that had happened before his daughter was born. He and Sarah had never had children, but the comparison still held, and tried to process what this meant. $47,000. That's what the papers had said was stolen. $47,000 in 1962 money, which would be worth a fortune now. And here it was, unclaimed, untouched, buried under a tree while people killed each other over it, and families destroyed each other with accusations. He thought about the stories Dutch had told, about how the town had turned on itself. 4 men suspected, local boys, people everyone knew. No evidence strong enough to charge them, but no way to prove innocence either. They'd all died within a few years of the robbery, all under circumstances that could charitably be called unfortunate. One in a bar fight, one in a hunting accident, one from a heart attack at 43, the 4th from pneumonia that should have been treatable, and their families had lived with the stain ever since. Eli carefully wrapped the money back in the oilcloth and set it aside. He pulled out his phone, the cheap flip model he'd bought at Dutch's store, mainly for emergencies, and checked the time. Nearly noon. He'd been here for over 2 hours. Whiskey had curled up in the shade, content to nap while his human did whatever mysterious thing humans did. Good dog, simple dog. A dog who'd just upended Eli's entire life without meaning to. Eli stood, his knees protesting the long squat, and brushed the worst of the dirt from his jeans. He looked at the excavation he'd made, at the exposed wagon and the violated vault, and felt the weight of decisions settling on his shoulders. He could cover it all back up, walk away. Nobody knew except him and a dog who couldn't talk. The money had been buried for 63 years. Another 63 wouldn't hurt anyone, but that was a coward's choice. And whatever else Eli Banner was, he wasn't a coward. He could take the money. Finder's rights, maybe. Lord knew he could use it. The cabin needed work. His pension barely covered food and heat. He could actually have something to leave behind when he went, instead of just debts and a dog nobody would want. That thought made him sick to his stomach. Sarah would have been ashamed of him for even considering it. This wasn't found treasure. This was blood money. 3 people died for it, which left the 3rd option. The right option, probably. Tell May. Turn it over to the authorities. Let the law sort out who it belonged to and what should be done with it. Eli pulled out one of the bundles of cash, just to look at it properly in the daylight. Old $20 bills, series from the early 60s, faces he recognized from history books. The bills were stuck together, stained, fragile, but they were real, very real. He thought about Hannah Brennan, Carl's daughter. Her father had been one of the guards killed in the robbery. She worked 2 jobs to keep her father in care and hold on to the house he'd raised her in. This money could change her life. He thought about Vernon Pitch, the mechanic who lived on the north edge of town. Vernon's father had been one of the 4 suspects. The accusation had followed Vernon his whole life, even though he'd been a child when it happened. The money, or at least the truth of where it had been, might finally clear his father's name. And he thought about Teddy Mallory, who lived 2 towns over. Eli didn't know much about him, but Dutch had mentioned him once. Grandson of another one of the suspects, what would this mean for him? Too many threads. Too many lives touched by something that happened when Eli was still a young man, working his first ranch job. This wasn't his burden to carry alone. He wrapped the bundle back up, placed it carefully in the vault with the others, and took several photos with his phone. The wagon, the bank plate, the vault, the contents. Evidence, in case someone accused him of stealing or moving things. Then he scooped dirt back over the opening, not burying it completely, but obscuring it enough that a casual passerby wouldn't see. He'd bring May here, today, let her see it in place before it got disturbed any more than it already was. Come on, Whiskey. We've got somewhere to be. The dog scrambled to his feet, happy to be moving again. They walked back through the woods at a faster pace than Eli usually managed, urgency pushing him forward. His mind kept circling back to that vault, to all that money just sitting there waiting. How many people had walked past that oak tree over the years? How many times had Eli himself passed within yards of it? The town came into view, such as it was. 6 buildings, scattered houses, the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked while driving through. But it was his town now, had been for 12 years, and this discovery was going to shake it to its foundations. May's patrol vehicle sat outside the substation. Good. Eli tied Whiskey's leash to the porch. Railing, the dog whined but settled and pushed through the door. May looked up from her desk, took one look at Eli's face, and set down her pen. What's wrong? I need you to come with me. Out to the oak grove. What happened? You hurt? Not hurt. But He paused, trying to find words that wouldn't sound insane. Whiskey dug something up. Something you need to see. May studied him. She'd been in law enforcement long enough to recognize when someone was shaken. What kind of something? The kind that's been missing since 1962. Understanding dawned in her eyes. She stood immediately, grabbed her jacket and keys. Show me. They walked in silence, May matching Eli's pace. Whiskey trotted between them, tail high, proud of himself. When they reached the grove, Eli pointed to the disturbed earth. There, May knelt down, examined the area without touching anything. Then she looked up at Eli. Did you open it? Some. Enough to know what it is. Stay here. She pulled out her phone and made a call, her voice professional and clipped. State police. Crime scene. Historical evidence. Yes, she was sure. She gave coordinates, estimated time of discovery, requested forensics. When she hung up, she looked at Eli with something like sympathy. You know what you just started, don't you? I've got some idea. Every person in this town with a grudge or a claim is going to come out of the woodwork. The families of the victims, the families of the accused, treasure hunters, lawyers. This is going to get ugly. Eli nodded slowly. I know. And you're at the center of it, the finder. That makes you either a hero or a target, depending on who's talking. I just want to do right by it. May stood, brushed dirt from her knees. That's the problem, Eli. Nobody's going to agree on what right looks like. Not with this much money and this much history. They stood together in the grove, waiting for the authorities to arrive, while Whiskey nosed around the base of the oak tree, completely unaware that he'd just rewritten his owner's future. The sun was past its peak now, shadows lengthening, and Eli felt the weight of what was coming settling over him like a shroud. He'd lived 67 years, trying to be decent, trying to do the right thing, trying to leave the world a little better than he found it. And now, in what should have been his quiet final years, he'd stumbled into the kind of moral maze that had no clear exit. But he'd made his choice. For better or worse, the past was unearthed now. All he could do was face what came next with as much integrity as he could manage and pray that it would be enough. The state police arrived within 2 hours, along with a forensics team from Helena. They cordoned off the oak grove with yellow tape, set up a perimeter, and began the careful work of excavating the wagon properly. May stood watch, keeping the curious at bay, while Eli gave his statement to a detective with tired eyes and a notebook full of shorthand. Word spread through Dustwater, the way wildfire spreads through dry grass. Fast, unstoppable, consuming everything in its path. By the time Eli walked back into town that evening, everyone knew. The stolen bank wagon had been found. Eli Banner's dog dug it up. The money was still inside. He stopped at Dutch's store for coffee, needing something normal after an afternoon of questions and forms and photographs. The bell jingled as he entered, and conversation stopped. 6 people inside, more than Eli usually saw at once, all turned to look at him. Dutch broke the silence. Eli, heard you had quite a day. Could say that. Coffee's on the house. Figure you've earned it. Eli poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of eyes on him. Carl Brennan sat in his usual spot by the stove, but his expression was different, focused, present in a way Eli rarely saw these days. They say it's the bank wagon, Carl said quietly. From the robbery. It is. My Judith was working that day. Carl's hands trembled around his coffee cup. She wasn't supposed to be there. Covered a shift for a friend. They shot her getting into the wagon. Eli had known Carl's wife died in the robbery. Everyone knew, but he'd never heard Carl talk about it directly. The old man's eyes were wet. I'm sorry, Carl. $47,000. That's what they killed her for. Carl shook his head. Could have fit it in a couple suitcases. Instead, they used the whole damn wagon. A woman stood near the back of the store, someone Eli recognized but didn't know well. She was mid-60s, dressed in a waitress uniform from the diner, dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She stepped forward. I'm Hannah Brennan, Carl's daughter, Eli Banner. I know who you are. Her voice was steady, controlled. My father was one of the guards. Kenneth Brennan. He was 42. I was 16. I'm sorry for your loss. It was a long time ago, but the way she said it suggested time hadn't healed much. They're saying the money's still there. All of it. That's what it looks like. What happens to it now? Dutch spoke up before Eli could answer. That's for the courts to decide. State property, most likely. Stolen funds get complicated. Stolen funds that cost 3 lives, Hannah said. That should count for something. The bell jingled again. A man Eli vaguely recognized entered, tall, weathered, probably 70, with grease permanently stained into the creases of his hands. He looked around the store, his jaw tight. Vernon, Dutch said carefully. You heard? Whole county's heard by now. Vernon Pitch moved to the coffee pot, poured himself a cup with hands that shook slightly. They find anything else? Any proof of who did it? State police are still processing the scene, May said from the doorway. Eli hadn't heard her come in. They'll release information as appropriate. Vernon turned to face her. My father's been dead 30 years. Died with everyone thinking he was a murderer. If there's proof he wasn't, if there's proof we'll find it, May said. I promise you that. Promises. Vernon's laugh was bitter. You know what promises from law enforcement meant to my family? Nothing, less than nothing. The tension in the room thickened. Hannah Brennan and Vernon Pitch stood on opposite sides of the store, separated by more than just space. One the daughter of a victim, one the son of a suspect. 2 people whose lives had been shaped by the same violence in completely different ways. My father was innocent, Vernon said, not looking at Hannah but clearly speaking to her. He was accused because he worked maintenance at the bank, because he knew the wagon's route. But he didn't do it. Someone did. Hannah's voice remained level. Someone killed my father and 2 other people, and you think it was mine. I don't know what to think, but I know my father is dead, and whoever did it went free. Dutch cleared his throat. This isn't helping anyone. What's done is done. Fighting about it now won't change the past. Maybe not, Vernon said. But the truth might change the future. He looked at Eli directly for the first time. What did you find? Besides money, I found a wagon and a vault. The state police have everything else, but you saw it. You were there first. Was there anything, any evidence? Eli thought about lying, about saying he hadn't looked that carefully. But these people deserved honesty, even if it was incomplete. There might be. I'm not an investigator. I don't know what counts as evidence, but there might be something that clears the innocent. Vernon's voice carried desperate hope. There might be. Vernon nodded, seemed to deflate slightly. That's something at least. That's more than we've had in 60 years. May moved further into the store. Listen, all of you. I know this brings up old pain, but we need to let the investigation proceed properly. That means not jumping to conclusions, not spreading rumors, not... She looked meaningfully around the room, forming up sides against each other. Hard not to take sides when people have been taking them against you for 60 years. Vernon muttered, I understand that. But we've got a chance here to find real answers. Don't waste it by tearing each other apart. An uncomfortable silence settled. Hannah Brennan picked up her purse from where she'd set it on a shelf. I need to get back to work. My shift starts in 20 minutes. She paused near the door, looked back at Eli. "Thank you for reporting it. For not just for doing the right thing," Eli nodded. She left, the bell jingling softly. Vernon drained his coffee and set the cup down with more force than necessary. "State police going to be out there all night?" "Probably," May said. "Then I guess we all just wait." He headed for the door, stopped, turned back. "Mr. Banner, I hope they find what proves my father was innocent. But even if they don't, I'm glad someone finally found that wagon. At least now we'll know something instead of just suspecting everything." After Vernon left, the remaining people drifted away one by one until it was just Eli, Dutch and May. Eli sank into Carl's vacated chair, suddenly exhausted. "That's going to be your life for a while," May said gently. "Everyone wanting a piece of this. Everyone with their own pain and their own needs." "I just wanted to walk my dog," Dutch snorted. "Welcome to being in the middle of history. It's not comfortable. What happens now?" Eli asked. May pulled up a chair. "State police will process everything. Could take days, could take weeks. They'll try to determine exactly what happened, piece together evidence. Meanwhile, news will spread. You'll probably get media attention. Lawyers will start circling. People will come forward with claims. Claims to what? Stolen money? To justice. To restitution. To closure. Everyone's going to want something different." Messi leaned forward. "Here's the hard part, Eli. Legally, as the finder, you might have a claim. Depending on how the law interprets found stolen property on public land. But ethically, it's blood money and I don't want it. Maybe, but what about Hannah? She's barely scraping by working 2 jobs. Her father died for that money. What about Vernon? His whole life has been poisoned by suspicion. Don't they deserve something? How do you split justice?" Eli asked quietly. "You don't. You just try to do the least harm possible." May stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be harder than today." After she left, Dutch locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. He poured them both fresh coffee and sat down heavily. "You know what the worst part is?" Dutch said. "Every one of those people is right. Hannah's right that the money represents her father's blood. Vernon's right that his father deserves vindication. The town's right that this is our history. You're right that you just wanted to walk your dog. There's no good answer where everyone wins. Then what do I do?" "What you've been doing. Tell the truth, be honest. Let the process work." Dutch paused. "And maybe pray a little. Can't hurt." Eli walked home as dusk settled over Dustwater, whiskey at his side. The dog was oblivious to the storm his digging had unleashed, happy just to be walking with his person. Eli envied that simplicity. His cabin looked the same as always, weathered, modest, barely holding itself together. But somehow it felt different knowing what he'd found today, knowing what was coming. The quiet life he'd built here was over. He was in the middle of something now, something that involved other people's pain and other people's needs, and he couldn't just walk away from it. Inside, he lit the wood stove and made a simple dinner. Whiskey ate from his bowl, then settled by the fire. Eli sat at his small table and looked at the worn leather collar around the dog's neck, at Sarah's initials carved inside. "What would you do?" he asked her ghost. "How would you make sense of this?" But he already knew. Sarah would have listened to everyone, would have tried to find the solution that helped the most people and hurt the least, would have put others before herself, the way she always had. Eli pulled out a piece of paper and a pen, started making a list of names. Hannah Brennan, Vernon Pitch, the descendants of the other victims, whoever they were, the other suspects' families, everyone touched by this 60-year-old tragedy. He didn't know what he could do for them, didn't know if there was any way to make this right, but he could try. For Sarah's sake, if not his own, he could at least try. Outside, darkness fell complete. Somewhere in the woods, under yellow tape and police lights, people were uncovering more of what had been buried. And in his cabin at the edge of town, Eli Banner began the harder work of trying to figure out what justice looked like when everyone deserved it and nobody could have it all. The excavation took 3 days. Eli stayed away mostly, but news filtered back through Dutch's store like water through a sieve. They'd photographed everything, catalogued every bill, every bond, every scrap of paper. brought in specialists from the state archives to handle documents that might disintegrate if handled wrong. The exact count came back on day 4, $47,230 in various denominations. Bearer bonds worth another $12,000. All of it accounted for in the bank's records from 1962. All of it still there, minus what decay and time had claimed. May posted the official findings on the community board outside her office. Eli stood reading them while a light rain fell, whiskey patient beside him. The ledger fragment she'd mentioned, a water-damaged page listing the exact stolen amount, had been preserved in a sealed envelope. Someone, probably the robbers themselves, had kept records, maybe planning to divvy it up later, maybe just being thorough in their theft. The notice also announced a town meeting for that evening at the community center. Public forum to discuss the findings and next steps. Attendance encouraged, but not required. Eli knew he'd have to go. The community center was a concrete block building that served as voting location, bingo hall, and general gathering space. By the time Eli arrived that evening, every chair was filled and people lined the walls. He slipped in quietly and found a spot in the back corner, hoping to observe rather than participate. That hope lasted about 10 minutes. The meeting started with May presenting the official findings. She spoke clearly, factually, avoiding speculation. When she finished, she opened the floor to questions and comments. Hannah Brennan stood first. "What happens to the money now?" "That's what we're here to discuss," May said. "The legal situation is complex. The money was stolen from the first bank of Dustwater, which no longer exists. The bank's assets were purchased by Mountain States Bank in 1975. Whether they have a claim is unclear. What about the families of the people who died?" This from a younger man Eli didn't recognize. "My grandmother was the bystander killed. Margaret Chen, she was just walking past when the shooting started. Claims can be filed," May said. "The county attorney's office is working with state officials to determine the process." Vernon Pitch stood, his voice carrying across the room. "What about proof of who did it? Was there anything in that wagon that clears the innocent?" May hesitated. "The investigation is ongoing. I can't comment on specific evidence. That means there's something." Vernon's face showed the first hope Eli had seen on it. "There's something that proves who was guilty and who wasn't." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Vernon looked around the room. "My father died with people thinking he was a murderer. If there's any chance to clear his name, I deserve to know." "We all deserve to know," someone else called out. "This has been hanging over this town for 60 years. The meeting dissolved into overlapping conversations, people calling out questions and opinions. May tried to maintain order, but it was like trying to hold back a tide with your hands. A man in his 40s, wearing a suit that looked out of place in Dustwater, stood and raised his voice above the chaos. "My name is Marcus Webb. I'm an attorney from Helena. I'd like to propose a solution." The room quieted. May nodded for him to continue. "The money represents stolen property, yes. But after 63 years, with the original bank defunct and the victims deceased, there's a strong legal argument for finders' rights." He gestured toward the back of the room. "Mr. Banner found this property on public land. Under Montana law, he may have the strongest claim." Every head in the room turned to look at Eli. He felt his face flush. "However," Webb continued, "there are equitable considerations. Mr. Banner might choose to waive his claim in favor of a distribution to victims' families. I'd be happy to represent him in that process." "Of course you would," Dutch muttered from his seat near the front. "Take your percentage either way." Webb smiled thinly. "Everyone deserves legal representation." "I'm simply offering my services." Hannah Brennan stood again. "With all respect to Mr. Banner, who I'm sure is a decent man, that money came from my father's blood, from Kenneth Brennan's blood, and the guard Thomas Sullivan's blood, and Margaret Chen's blood. Their families should be first in line for any claims. My family bled too." Vernon's voice cracked. "Maybe not literally, but we bled. My father lost his job, his reputation, his will to live. My mother died of shame. That wagon destroyed us just as sure as it destroyed you." The difference is, your father might have been guilty, Hannah shot back. Mine definitely wasn't. You don't know that. You don't know anything except what people assumed. May banged her hand on the podium. Enough! This isn't helping anyone. But the damage was done. The room split into factions. Families of victims on one side, families of suspects on another, lawyers and opportunists circling both. Eli watched it all from the back, feeling sick. When the meeting finally ended nearly 2 hours later, nothing had been resolved. May had promised to work with the county attorney. Webb had passed out business cards to anyone who'd take one. People left in clusters, still arguing, still wounded. Eli tried to slip out quickly, but May caught him at the door. "Walk with me," she said quietly. They walked toward her office, whiskey trotting between them. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick, reflecting the few streetlights Dustwater could afford to keep running. "They're going to come after you," May said. "All of them. Wanting you to choose sides. Wanting you to use your finder's claim to benefit them. I don't want the money, I know. But legally, you might have the right to it. And rights have a way of turning into responsibilities." She stopped outside her office. "My grandfather was sheriff when the robbery happened. Did you know that?" Dutch mentioned something. He spent the rest of his life believing he failed this town. Failed to catch the killers. Failed to recover the money. Failed to keep the peace when suspicion tore families apart. "He died when I was 12, but I remember how it ate at him." She looked at Eli directly. "This is your chance to succeed where he failed. To find a way forward that heals instead of harms. That's a hell of a burden to put on an old man who just wanted to walk his dog. I know. But burden or not, it's yours now." She pulled her keys from her pocket. "Come inside. There's something I need to show you." In her office, May unlocked a file cabinet and pulled out a folder marked with the case number from 1962. Grandfather's personal files. He never turned them over when he retired. Kept them until he died. Then my grandmother gave them to me when I joined the force. She opened the folder and spread papers across her desk. Investigation notes, interview transcripts, photos of the crime scene, the bodies, the blood on the street where the wagon had stood. The official investigation focused on 4 suspects, May said. "But look at this." She pointed to a note in the margin of one report. Grandfather wrote, "Something wrong about Tom B. Too scared." "Wrong kind of scared. Tom B. Thomas Banner. The man who owned your cabin before you." Eli felt the world tilt slightly. "My cabin? You bought it from the county in 2013, seized for back taxes. But it was Thomas Banner's property originally. He died in 1963, just over a year after the robbery. Heart attack, supposedly. He was 43. Are you telling me I'm telling you there might be a connection? I don't know what kind. But Thomas Banner was one of the 4 suspects. And you're living in his house. That's going to complicate things when it comes out." Eli sank into a chair. "I didn't know. I bought it at auction. Just needed somewhere to live. I believe you. But others might not be so understanding." May closed the folder. "I'm telling you this now because you need to be prepared. When they dig deeper into the history, your connection is going to surface. Better you know now than get blindsided." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, Dustwater was quiet. Most people already home for the night. The town that had been peaceful just 4 days ago now felt like it was sitting on a fault line, waiting to crack open. "What do I do?" Eli asked. "Tell the truth. That's all you can do. Be honest about what you found, why you reported it, what you want from all this." She paused. "What do you want, Eli?" He thought about Hannah Brennan working 2 jobs. About Vernon Pitch trying to clear his father's name. About families torn apart by violence and suspicion. About Sarah and what she would have wanted. "I want to do right by it," he said finally. "By all of them. But I don't know how." "Neither do I," May admitted. "But we'll figure it out." One step at a time, Eli walked home under a sky cleared of rain, stars visible now, sharp and cold. Whiskey stayed close, sensing his person's troubled mood. The cabin looked different knowing its history. Thomas Banner had lived here, one of the suspects, a man who died young, his reputation destroyed. Inside, Eli lit the stove and sat at his table. He pulled out the list he'd started the night before, names of people affected by the robbery. Now he added another name at the top, Thomas Banner, a man he'd never met, a distant relative he'd never known existed, but connected to him now through property and history and the strange way the past refused to stay buried. Eli looked around the cabin with new eyes. What secrets had Thomas Banner kept here? What had he known? And why had he died so young, his heart giving out when he should have had decades left? The questions piled up faster than any answers could come. All Eli knew for certain was that he was part of this now, whether he wanted to be or not. The wagon was unearthed. The money was found. The old wounds were reopened, and somehow, in the time he had left, he needed to help them heal. The news vans arrived on day 7. 3 of them, from stations in Helena and Billings, satellite dishes mounted on their roofs like strange mechanical flowers. They set up in the parking lot of Dutch's store, the only place in town flat enough for their equipment. Eli avoided them. He stayed in his cabin, curtains drawn, while reporters knocked on his door and called his name. Whiskey barked at the intrusions, protective of his territory. Eventually they gave up and turned their cameras on other people, May giving official statements, Dutch offering colorful commentary about Dustwater's history, townspeople happy to share opinions on camera. The story went regional, then briefly national. Hidden bank wagon found after 60 years. Dog uncovers long-lost heist money. Small town's dark secret finally revealed. The headlines made it sound like an adventure story, something exciting and clean. They didn't capture the complexity, the old wounds, the impossible choices. On the morning of day 8, Marcus Webb showed up at Eli's door. He wore the same suit from the town meeting, looking crisp despite the early hour. "Mr. Banner, may I have a moment of your time?" Eli considered closing the door, but something in Webb's direct gaze made him step aside instead. They sat at Eli's small table. Webb declined coffee but accepted water. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and laid out documents. "I've done some research," Webb said. "Montana law on found property is clear in some ways, murky in others. But there's a strong case that as the finder of abandoned property on public land, you have the primary claim. It's not abandoned. It's stolen. Stolen from an entity that no longer exists. The bank dissolved in 1975. Its successor, Mountain States, has no direct claim to physical cash, only to recorded debts and assets. This is physical currency bearer bonds. Possession matters. What about the families of the people who died? They can file civil claims. Probably will. But establishing legal standing 60 years after the fact is complicated. You, on the other hand, have clear standing as finder." Webb leaned forward. "With proper legal representation, we could secure your claim within 6 months. The money, adjusted for inflation and bond interest, is worth approximately $320,000. Eli looked at the papers without touching them. $320,000. More money than he'd earn in 10 lifetimes of his pension. What's your fee? 20%. Standard for this type of case. You'd walk away with over $250,000, and the families would walk away with nothing. They'd walk away with closure, with proof of what happened, with the case finally solved." Webb tapped the papers. "You can't solve everyone's problems, Mr. Banner. Sometimes you have to look after yourself. I've got a roof over my head and enough to eat." "That's looking after myself." Webb sat back, studying him. "You're going to turn it down. I'm going to do what's right. Right according to whom? Hannah Brennan thinks she deserves it because her father died. Vernon Pitch thinks he deserves it because his father was falsely accused. Teddy Mallory, James Mallory's grandson, thinks he deserves it through inheritance. They all think they're right. They can't all be. Maybe none of them are right. Maybe this money should have stayed buried, but it didn't stay buried. Your dog found it. That's not your fault, but it's your reality." Webb gathered his papers. "Think about it. My offer stands, but other lawyers will approach you too, and they won't all be as straightforward as I am." After Webb left, Eli sat alone in his cabin. Whiskey nuzzled his hand, and he scratched the dog's ears absently. $320,000. He could fix the cabin properly, buy a new truck, have something to leave behind when he died, instead of just debts. But to whom would he leave it? He had no children, no close family. The distant relatives who might exist somewhere wouldn't know or care. The money would just sit in a bank, earning interest for strangers. He stood and walked to the small bookshelf where he kept Sarah's things. Her Bible, the one she'd read every morning. Her collection of pressed flowers. A box of letters she'd written him during the 6 months he'd worked a ranch in Wyoming before they married. He pulled out the Bible, ran his hand over the worn leather cover. She'd marked passages in pencil, written notes in the margins. He flipped through it looking for something. Guidance, maybe. Or just her presence, the echo of her faith. A piece of paper fell out, folded and yellowed. Eli picked it up carefully. Sarah's handwriting, shaky but still hers. The date in the corner, 3 weeks before she died. "My dear Eli," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone, and you're looking for answers I can't give you anymore. But I know you, sweetheart. I know you'll want to do what's right, and you'll tie yourself in knots trying to figure out what that means. Here's what I learned in 58 years. Right isn't always the same as easy, and it's rarely the same as profitable. When you're stuck between choices and can't see clear, ask yourself this: what helps the most people? What does the least harm? And then, even if it costs you, do that thing. You've always been better than you think you are. Trust that. Trust yourself. And remember, I love you always and forever. Do what's kind, not what's easy." Eli read the letter 3 times, his vision blurring. Sarah's voice so clear in the words, he could almost hear her saying them. Do what's kind, not what's easy. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. That afternoon, he walked to Hannah Brennan's house. She lived on the south end of town, in a small 1-story that needed paint and new shingles. Her car, an old sedan with a dent in the door, sat in the driveway. Eli knocked. Hannah answered, still in her diner uniform, looking tired. "Mr. Banner, I was hoping we could talk. If you have time." She studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "Oh, come in." The house was tidy but worn, furniture that had seen decades of use. Photos covered the walls. Hannah as a young girl with a man Eli assumed was her father. Kenneth Brennan, young and smiling, in his bank guard uniform. Hannah's mother, beautiful and sad-eyed. A family frozen in time before tragedy struck. Hannah made coffee without asking, and they sat at her kitchen table. The same ritual people all over Dustwater performed, the small comfort of hot coffee and conversation. "The lawyers are circling," Hannah said. 3 of them have called me already, wanting to represent me in claims against the money. Are you going to file? I don't know. Part of me thinks I should. My father died for that money. I've worked 2 jobs for 20 years, barely keeping this house. That money could change my life. She sipped her coffee. But another part of me thinks, what would he want? Would he want me fighting over blood money? What do you think he'd want? I think he'd want me to be happy, to stop struggling, to have something easier. She smiled sadly. But I also think he'd want the truth more than the money. He was honest, believed in doing right, even when it cost him. That's why he stayed in Dustwater when he could have taken a better job somewhere else. He believed in this town. Eli pulled the letter from his pocket and handed it to her. "My wife wrote this before she died. I found it today." Hannah read it carefully, her expression softening. When she finished, she handed it back. She was a wise woman. She was. And she's right. I need to do what's kind, not what's easy. What does that look like? I don't know yet. But I know I can't take that money for myself. It wouldn't be right. They talked for another hour, sharing memories of lost spouses and hard years, and the strange way grief settles into the bones. When Eli left, he felt lighter somehow, even though nothing was resolved. From Hannah's house, he walked to the north end of town, where Vernon Pitch ran his auto repair shop. Vernon was under a truck, only his legs visible, tools spread around him on the concrete floor. "Mr. Pitch." Vernon rolled out on a creeper, grease on his face and hands. He recognized Eli and sat up. "Banner, here to ask me to drop my claims too?" "Don't have any claims to drop. Just wanted to talk." Vernon wiped his hands on a rag and stood. He gestured to a couple of overturned crates. "Not much for seating, but it's what I've got." They sat. The shop smelled like oil and metal and hard work. Tools lined the walls, organized with the precision of someone who'd spent decades in the same space. My father was a good man, Vernon said without prompting. Robert Pitch worked maintenance at the bank for 15 years. Fixed things, kept the building running. He knew the wagon's schedule because it was his job to know, had to coordinate repairs around the cash deliveries. That's why they suspected him. That, and the fact that he was one of only 4 people who knew the exact route and timing. But knowing something doesn't mean you did something. Vernon's jaw tightened. They destroyed him without ever charging him. Fired him. Blacklisted him. We had to move 2 towns over. My mother worked herself to death trying to keep us fed. My father drank himself into the grave. I was 14 when he died. 16 when she followed. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't clear a name. Sorry doesn't give me back a childhood or give them back their lives. Vernon looked at Eli directly. But proof might. If there's anything in that wagon that shows who really did it, that proves my father was innocent, that's all I want. I don't care about the money. I never did. Eli understood then. Hannah wanted justice for what was taken. Vernon wanted justice for what was falsely given. Both deserved it. Both couldn't fully have it, because the men who could have provided answers were long dead. He walked home as the sun set, whiskey tired from the day's wanderings. The cabin looked different now, knowing its history. Thomas Banner had lived here. Died here, maybe. One of the 4 suspects, according to May. Inside, Eli built a fire and sat with Sarah's letter, reading it again by the flickering light. Do what's kind. Do what helps the most people. Do what does the least harm. The money felt like a curse now, poisoned by the blood it cost and the suspicion it created. No matter who got it, someone else would suffer. No matter how it was divided, someone would feel cheated. But maybe, and this thought came to him slowly, like dawn breaking, maybe the answer wasn't in dividing it. Maybe the answer was in what the money could become instead of what it was. Not a prize to be fought over, but a foundation for healing. He didn't know yet how that would work. But for the first time since Whiskey started digging, Eli felt like he might be seeing a path forward. Narrow and uncertain, but there nonetheless. The breakthrough came on day 12, during the final sweep of the excavation site. A metal detector operator found something 3 feet from the wagon, buried separately, but at the same depth. The forensics team carefully removed it from the soil. A compass. Brass, heavily corroded, but with initials engraved on the back. JPM May called Eli into her office that afternoon to show him the photographs. The compass sat in an evidence bag, green with age but still recognizable. The initials were clear, despite decades underground. James Patrick Mallory, May said. Jimmy to his friends. He was 28 in 1962, worked as a clerk at the bank. One of the 4 suspects. Why was it buried separately from the wagon? Best guess. He dropped it during the burial. Realized later, came back to find it but couldn't, or died before he could retrieve it. May pulled up files on her computer. I've been going through the old investigation records. Jimmy Mallory died 6 months after the robbery. Bar fight in a town 50 miles from here. Stabbed in an argument over a card game. Convenient or tragic, depending on your perspective. The investigating officer noted that Mallory was drunk, belligerent, looking for a fight. Like a man carrying guilt he couldn't handle. May leaned back in her chair. The compass puts him at the burial site. That's not proof he committed the robbery, but it's evidence he knew where the wagon was. What about the other 3 suspects? Thomas Banner, your cabin's previous owner, had no physical evidence linking him to the site. Neither did Robert Pitch or Samuel Cruz. Just circumstantial connections through their jobs at the bank. She paused. The compass changes things. It suggests Mallory was involved, possibly as the primary actor. The others might have been innocent. Might have been. But we can't know for sure. No, we can't. They're all dead, and the dead don't defend themselves. The news spread quickly. By that evening, Vernon Pitch showed up at Eli's cabin, his face showing more life than Eli had seen yet. Did you hear? The compass. It's Mallory's. They found Mallory's compass at the site. I heard. That means my father wasn't involved. He couldn't have been. There's no evidence placing him there. There's no evidence placing him anywhere, Eli said gently. Absence of evidence isn't the same as evidence of innocence. Vernon's enthusiasm dimmed. It's something, though. It's more than we had. It is. And maybe the state investigators will find more. But even if they don't, you know the truth. You know your father. I know what I believe. But belief doesn't change what people think they know. They talked for a while longer, Vernon sharing memories of his father, a quiet man who fixed things, who came home with grease under his fingernails, and stories about pipes and wiring, and the satisfaction of making broken things work. Not a thief, not a murderer. Just a man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, destroyed by association. After Vernon left, Eli sat on his porch with whiskey, watching the sun set. The compass had changed the equation. If Mallory was guilty, if he alone buried the wagon, then the other suspects were innocent. Their families deserved acknowledgement. Vernon deserved his father's name cleared, but it also meant Mallory's descendants, if any existed, were connected to a murderer. The answer came 2 days later. A man drove into Dustwater in a pickup truck that had seen better decades, parked outside Dutch's store, and asked loudly where he could find the sheriff. Eli happened to be there, picking up supplies. He watched the man, mid-40s, weathered face, work clothes stained with what looked like paint or drywall dust. May came over from her office. "I'm Deputy Cortland. Can I help you?" "I'm Teddy Mallory. I hear you found my grandfather's money." The store went quiet. Dutch stopped mid-transaction. The 2 other customers turned to stare. May's expression remained neutral. "Maybe we should talk in my office. Nothing to talk about privately. That money belonged to James Mallory. He was my grandfather. That makes it mine by inheritance. Your grandfather was one of 4 suspects in a robbery that killed 3 people," May said evenly. "No one's been convicted. No inheritance has been established. He's dead. They're all dead. The bank's dead. Who else has a claim?" Hannah Brennan walked through the door, stopping when she saw the confrontation. Teddy noticed her. "You must be one of the victims' families. I'm sorry for what happened, but that was 60 years ago. Ancient history. The money should go to the living." Hannah's voice came out cold and controlled. "Ancient history is my father in the ground. Ancient history is growing up without him. Ancient history is watching my mother work herself to death, trying to raise me alone. That's tragic, but it's not my fault." "My grandfather, your grandfather murdered 3 people," Hannah said. "If that compass proves anything, it proves he was there. He buried that wagon, which means he stole the money and he killed my father. You don't know that. You can't prove 3 feet from a buried bank wagon. His compass, his initials." Hannah stepped closer. "Your inheritance is blood money. Every dollar is soaked in my father's blood." Teddy's face flushed. "Look, I'm sorry about your father, but I've got kids to feed. Bills piling up. I'm barely keeping my head above water. That money could change my life. It could change mine too," Hannah said quietly. "But I'd never sleep again, knowing where it came from." Dutch spoke up from behind the counter. "Maybe nobody should get it. Maybe it should go to something that helps everyone instead of just one person with a claim." "Easy for you to say," Teddy shot back. "You're not drowning in debt. Some of us don't have the luxury of being noble." Vernon Pitch had entered during the argument, standing just inside the door. He looked at Teddy with something between pity and disgust. "Your grandfather destroyed my family, and you want to profit from it? I want what's legally mine." There's nothing legal about murder. The argument escalated, voices rising, old wounds tearing open fresh. May finally raised her voice above the chaos. "Everyone out, now, this isn't helping anyone." Slowly, reluctantly, people filtered out. Teddy lingered, making eye contact with Eli for the first time. "You're the one who found it. You've got the finder's claim. Smart lawyer could make you rich. I don't want to be rich off someone else's tragedy. Then you're a fool. In this world, you take what you can get while you can get it." Teddy headed for the door, stopped, looked back. "My grandfather might have been guilty. Probably was. But that money's still sitting there, and somebody's going to get it. Might as well be blood relatives as strangers." After he left, Dutch poured coffee for everyone remaining. Eli, May, Hannah, and Vernon. They sat in the quiet store, the weight of the confrontation settling over them. "He's not wrong," Vernon said bitterly. "Somebody's going to get that money. And whoever it is, somebody else is going to feel cheated. Unless nobody gets it, Hannah said. They all looked at her. Dutch mentioned it earlier. What if instead of dividing it up, it goes to something that benefits everyone? A memorial, a scholarship, something that turns this tragedy into something constructive. The families of the victims should still get something, Vernon said. That's only fair. And the families of the falsely accused should get their names cleared, Hannah countered. That's only fair, too. What if we could do both? Eli spoke for the first time since Teddy left. What if the money goes partly to the families who lost someone, partly to a memorial that clears the names of the innocent, and partly to something ongoing that helps the community? May nodded slowly. It would take cooperation, legal wrangling, agreement from multiple parties. But it's possible. Teddy Mallory won't agree, Vernon said. Maybe he doesn't have to, May said. If the evidence is strong enough that James Mallory committed the crime alone, his descendants might not have legal standing for a claim. Profiting from a crime, even inherited, isn't typically allowed. They talked for another hour, sketching out possibilities. It wasn't a solution yet, just the framework of one. But it was more than they'd had before. A vision of how justice might look when everyone deserved something and no one could have everything. Eli walked home in the gathering dusk, the conversation replaying in his mind. He thought about Sarah's letter, about doing what was kind instead of what was easy. This path wouldn't be easy. It would require compromise, negotiation, and probably legal battles. But it might be kind. It might heal more than it hurt. Back in his cabin, he pulled out the letter again and read it by lamplight. Whiskey slept by the fire, the dog's presence a comfort. Tomorrow, he'd start making calls. He'd talk to a lawyer, not Webb, someone else, someone who specialized in estates and settlements. He'd propose formally what they'd discussed informally. He'd try to turn blood money into healing. It might not work. Teddy might sue. Other claimants might emerge. The state might confiscate everything. But at least Eli would know he'd tried. At least he'd be able to sleep at night, knowing he'd chosen kindness over profit, healing over harm. Outside, the Montana night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. The same stars that had shone the night of the robbery 63 years ago. The same stars that would shine long after everyone involved was gone. But maybe, just maybe, they'd shine on a town that had finally found a way to heal. The shed behind Eli's cabin was barely standing, held together by rust and stubbornness. He avoided it mostly, using it only to store firewood and tools he rarely touched. But 3 weeks after the discovery, a windstorm knocked loose one of the wallboards, and Eli spent a morning trying to nail it back in place, while searching for longer nails. He pulled down a metal toolbox from the highest shelf. It was old, heavy, covered in dust thick as felt. Eli didn't remember putting it there. He'd inherited the shed's contents along with the cabin, never bothering to sort through what was useful and what was junk. He pried open the rusted latch. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a key. Eli's hands stilled. He knew that key. He'd seen photographs of its twin just days ago in May's office. The same size, the same worn brass, the same distinctive cut pattern. A vault key. The vault key from the first bank of Dustwater. His heart began to pound. Why would there be a bank vault key in his shed? He dug deeper into the toolbox. Beneath the key, he found documents sealed in a waterproof bag. County records. A deed to the property dated 1961. The name on the deed, Thomas Banner. Eli sat down hard on the shed floor, the box in his lap. Thomas Banner. May had mentioned the name, one of the 4 suspects. But she'd said Thomas owned the cabin. Eli had bought it from the county, seized for back taxes after Thomas died, which meant Eli had been living in a suspect's house for 12 years without knowing it. He carried the box inside, his mind racing. Whiskey followed, sensing something wrong. Eli spread the contents across his kitchen table and examined each piece. The deed, tax records from the early 60s, and at the bottom, a leather-bound journal. The journal was water-stained but intact, protected by the sealed bag. Eli opened it carefully. The first entry was dated January 1962. started this journal on Margaret's advice. She says writing helps process the difficult times. Don't know if I believe her, but I'll try. Work at the bank is steady. Pay is fair. Life is simple. That's enough. Eli flipped through the pages. Mundane entries about work, weather, small observations about life in Dustwater. Then dated October 15th, 1962, 3 weeks after the robbery, the tone changed. Everything is falling apart. They think I was involved. Me and Robert and Samuel and Jimmy. 4 of us who knew the Wagon schedule. 4 of us who could have planned it. But only one of us who did. Eli's hands trembled as he read. I know it was Jimmy. I saw him 3 days before it happened, nervous, distracted. I saw the guilt in his eyes the day after, before anyone even knew the money was missing. I know because Jimmy is my friend, was my friend. I don't know what he is now. The entries continued. Thomas writing about the investigation, the suspicion, the way the town turned on all 4 suspects equally. Robert's firing, Samuel's harassment, Thomas losing his own job, the slow destruction of 4 families for one man's crime. I could tell them. I could point to Jimmy. But Margaret, God, Margaret doesn't deserve to lose her husband and her innocence both. She loves him, believes in him. How do I destroy that? Eli stopped reading, his breath caught. Margaret, Jimmy's wife. And then the connection hit him. Thomas had mentioned Margaret earlier, said she suggested he keep a journal. Margaret Mallory, Jimmy's wife, was Thomas's sister. He kept reading, the entries growing more desperate as the months passed. Jimmy died tonight. Bar fight, they're saying, but I think it was suicide by proxy. He wanted to die. Couldn't live with what he'd done. Margaret is destroyed. She keeps saying it can't be true. Her Jimmy couldn't have done those terrible things. I won't tell her. What good would it do now? The final entries were dated early 1963. Thomas's handwriting shakier, harder to read. My heart is giving out. Doctor says it's stress, but I know it's shame. Shame for protecting a murderer. Shame for letting Robert and Samuel die under suspicion. Shame for being a coward. I've hidden the key where it won't be found. Let it stay buried like the truth. Some burdens aren't meant to be shared. The last entry was a single line. Jimmy's burden is buried where the old oak grows crooked. I pray someone finds it someday and sets this right. Eli set down the journal, his vision blurred. Thomas Banner wasn't a criminal. He was a man who'd tried to protect his sister and paid for it with his life. He'd known the truth, known where the money was buried, but stayed silent to spare one person pain, even though it meant 3 other families suffered. And now Eli, living in Thomas's house, had found what Thomas wanted found. The truth, the evidence, the key that unlocked more than just a vault. He sat at the table for a long time, Whiskey's head resting on his knee. The journal changed everything. It proved Thomas's innocence. It proved Robert Pitch's innocence. It proved Samuel Cruz's innocence. It pointed definitively to James Mallory as the sole perpetrator, which meant Vernon Pitch could finally clear his father's name. The other families of the accused could have vindication, but it also meant Teddy Mallory would lose any claim he might have had. His grandfather would be revealed as a murderer beyond any doubt, and Margaret Mallory, wherever she was, if she was still alive, would finally know the truth her husband and her brother both died keeping from her. Eli thought about Sarah's letter. Do what's kind. But what was kind here? Telling the truth would help some people and devastate others. Keeping quiet would preserve some dignity, but deny justice to those who deserved it. He pulled out his phone and called May. She arrived 20 minutes later, still in uniform from her shift. Eli showed her everything, the key, the deed, the journal. She read the entries carefully, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she set the journal down gently. This changes everything, she said quietly. I know. This proves Thomas Banner's innocence, and Robert Pitch's, and Samuel Cruz's. 3 men died under suspicion, and this clears them all. It also proves James Mallory was guilty, alone, which means Teddy has no legitimate claim. May nodded. More than that, it means we can finally close the case. Not officially, the perpetrator is dead, but morally. The families can have closure. What about Margaret Mallory? Jimmy's widow. Is she still alive? May pulled out her phone and did a quick search. Margaret Mallory, born 1934, died 2019, 85 years old. She never remarried. Lived in Great Falls, worked as a teacher. Died never knowing her husband was a murderer, and her brother protected her from that knowledge. Maybe that's a kindness, Eli said. Maybe dying without knowing was better than living with it. Maybe, but her son, Teddy's father, he might have known something. And Teddy himself deserves to understand his family history, even if it's painful. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, evening was falling, painting the sky in shades of amber and purple. Inside, the journal sat between them. A dead man's confession, a dead man's protection, a truth that had waited 60 years to surface. What do we do? Eli asked. We tell the truth, all of it. We give this to the state investigators. We let them verify the handwriting, authenticate the documents. And then we let the families decide what to do with the information. Vernon will be relieved. His father's name finally cleared. Hannah will have confirmation of who killed her father. The other victims' families will know. That's worth something. And Teddy? May's expression hardened slightly. Teddy will learn that his grandfather was a murderer and his great-uncle died protecting his grandmother from that truth. That's going to be hard, but it's the truth. And sometimes the truth is hard. Eli thought about Thomas Banner, living in this cabin, carrying the weight of what he knew, watching 3 innocent families suffer while protecting one guilty secret. Dying young, his heart giving out under the strain. A good man who made an impossible choice and paid for it with his life. I've been living in his house, Eli said. All this time, I've been living in the house of one of the suspects. When people find out, they'll understand. You didn't know. You bought the property legally, 12 years after his death, decades after the robbery. You're not responsible for Thomas Banner's choices, but I'm connected to him now. The cabin, the key, the journal. I'm part of his story, whether I want to be or not. We're all part of each other's stories, May said gently. That's what community means. Thomas's story touches yours. Yours touches Vernon's and Hannah's and everyone else's. The question isn't whether we're connected. It's what we do with those connections. She stood, picking up the journal carefully. I need to take this. Document it. Start the authentication process. But Eli, you did the right thing. Calling me. Turning this over. Not everyone would have. After she left, Eli sat alone in the cabin that had belonged to Thomas Banner. He looked around with new eyes. The walls Thomas had built or repaired. The floors Thomas had walked. The stove Thomas had used to keep warm. A man who'd lived and died here, carrying a secret that ate him alive. Eli understood now why he'd been drawn to this place when he bought it. Why it had felt right despite its flaws. He and Thomas weren't so different. Both men who'd lost more than they could bear. Both trying to do right in impossible circumstances. Both willing to pay the price for protecting what mattered. The difference was that Thomas had died with his secret intact. Eli wouldn't make the same choice. He'd tell the truth, whatever the cost. For Vernon and his father. For Hannah and hers. For Samuel Cruz and his descendants. For everyone who'd suffered under the weight of false accusations, and yes, for Thomas Banner himself. The man who'd wanted someone to find the truth and set it right. Who'd left clues, the buried key, the cryptic journal entry about the crooked oak, hoping that someday someone would understand. Eli had found it. Whiskey had dug it up, but Eli had recognized it for what it was. A chance to heal old wounds. A chance to turn tragedy into truth. A chance to honor both the dead and the living by finally, after 63 years, setting the record straight. Outside, stars emerged in the darkening sky. The same stars Thomas had seen. The same stars that would shine long after everyone involved was dust. But for now, for this moment, Eli could make a difference. He could speak for a man who died silent. He could clear names that had been stained for decades. He could do what was kind, even when it wasn't easy, and he would. The authentication took 3 days. State forensics examined the journal, the key, the documents. They verified the handwriting against Thomas Banner's known signatures. They tested the paper and ink, confirming both dated to the early 1960s. They cross-referenced the key with photographs of the vault lock, everything checked out. The journal was genuine. Thomas Banner's account was truthful. James Mallory had acted alone. May called Eli on the fourth day. It's official. The state investigators are closing the case. James Patrick Mallory committed the robbery and murders in 1962. The other three suspects, Thomas Banner, Robert Pitch, and Samuel Cruz, are cleared of all suspicion. Eli sat down heavily in his kitchen chair. Just like that? After 63 years? Just like that. They're preparing an official statement. But Eli, they want to release it publicly at a town meeting. Give the families closure in front of the community. Let Dustwater see the truth all at once. When? 3 days. Gives everyone time to prepare. She paused. Time to say what needs saying. After he hung up, Eli sat with whiskey thinking. 3 days until the truth came out. 3 days until Vernon learned his father was innocent. Until Hannah learned definitively who killed her father. Until Teddy learned his grandfather was a murderer. 3 days until Thomas Banner's name was cleared. Eli pulled out paper and pen. He'd never been much for writing, but this needed to be said properly. Needed to be recorded. He started with a simple heading, a request for official recognition of Thomas Banner's innocence. The words came slowly at first, then faster as he found his rhythm. He wrote about finding the journal, about Thomas's sacrifice, protecting his sister while watching 3 innocent families suffer. About a man who died carrying the weight of impossible knowledge. About how truth delayed is still truth, and justice delayed is still justice. He wrote for 2 hours, revising and refining until he had something that felt right. A formal letter requesting that the town of Dustwater officially acknowledge Thomas Banner's innocence and recognize his character. That they understand he wasn't a criminal, but a man caught in an impossible position who made the choice he thought would cause the least pain. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and that was enough. The next morning, Eli showed the letter to May. She read it carefully, her expression thoughtful. "This is going to stir things up," she said. "You're not just asking for Thomas to be cleared. You're asking the town to understand why he stayed silent. He deserves that. He paid for his silence with his life. Some people won't see it that way. They'll say if he'd spoken up, the other families wouldn't have suffered. I know. But someone needs to speak for him now, since he can't speak for himself." May handed the letter back. "Then you'll read this at the meeting, after the official statement. Give people a chance to understand the full story. Will Teddy be there?" "Probably. He has a right to know, even if it hurts." Eli spent the next 2 days preparing. He practiced reading the letter aloud to Whiskey, who listened with patient incomprehension. He walked the woods where Whiskey had found the wagon, saying a silent prayer for everyone touched by that long-ago violence. He visited Sarah's grave and told her what he planned to do. "I hope I'm doing right by this," he said to the headstone. "I hope Thomas would approve. I hope," his voice caught, "I hope you'd be proud of me." The wind moved through the cemetery grass, and Eli chose to believe it was her answer. On the morning of the meeting, Vernon Pitch showed up at Eli's cabin. He stood on the porch, hat in his hands, looking older than his 70 years. "I heard they found proof," Vernon said. "Proof my father was innocent." "They did. Can I see it?" Eli invited him in and showed him copies of the journal entries that mentioned Robert Pitch. Vernon read them with trembling hands, tears sliding down his weathered face. "He knew," Vernon whispered. "Thomas Banner knew my father was innocent, but he stayed quiet. He was protecting his sister. Margaret Mallory? She was married to the real killer, so my father died in shame to spare her feelings." Vernon's voice held anger now, mixed with the grief, to spare her knowledge that would have destroyed her. "Thomas thought it was kinder. My mother worked herself to death. My father drank himself into the grave. My childhood was stolen." "That's kinder?" Eli had no answer. There was no answer. Thomas had made an impossible choice in an impossible situation, and people had suffered either way. Vernon stood, pacing the small cabin. "I've spent my whole life defending a man I knew was innocent but couldn't prove. 60 years of people looking at me sideways. 60 years of carrying his shame. And now I find out someone knew the truth all along and chose not to tell. Thomas Banner paid for that choice, Eli said quietly. It killed him. The stress, the guilt, the shame of watching innocent people suffer. He died at 43 because his heart couldn't take it. Vernon stopped pacing, looked at Eli directly. You're going to defend him at the meeting, aren't you? You're going to ask people to forgive him. I'm going to ask people to understand him. There's a difference, is there? Because from where I'm standing, understanding and forgiving look pretty similar. They stood in tense silence. Then Vernon's shoulders sagged. I don't know how to feel. Part of me is grateful. Finally, I have proof my father was innocent. Part of me is angry that it took this long, that someone could have ended our suffering and chose not to. And part of me, he paused, part of me understands. If it was my sister, my family, could I have done different? I don't know. Nobody knows until they're in that position. Vernon nodded slowly. I'll be at the meeting. I need to hear it all. Need to know the whole truth, even the parts that make me angry. He headed for the door, stopped. Thank you, Eli, for finding it, for reporting it, for trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. That matters. After Vernon left, Eli sat with his letter, reading it one more time. The words felt right, felt like something Sarah would approve of. He folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. Hannah Brennan came by that afternoon. She brought coffee cake, still warm from her oven, and they sat at his kitchen table like old friends. May told me about the journal, she said, about Thomas Banner knowing the truth. I'm sorry. I know that must be difficult. Actually, Hannah cut a piece of cake, her movements deliberate. Actually, it helps. Knowing definitively who killed my father, knowing it was one man, not a conspiracy, knowing the others were innocent, she paused. Thomas Banner made a hard choice, chose to protect his sister over clearing the innocent. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. You do? I'm a mother, Eli. I have 2 grown children. If I'd known something that would destroy one of them, known it would paint them as the child of a murderer, I don't know if I could have spoken up either. Love makes us do complicated things. Eli felt his chest tighten with emotion. That's generous of you. It's not generous. It's just, I've lived with this for so long. Spent so many years angry at the unknown. And now I know. The unknown has a name and a story. And somehow that's enough. She looked at him directly. Are you asking the town to forgive Thomas? I'm asking them to acknowledge his innocence, to understand his position, to recognize that he paid a terrible price for the choice he made. I can support that. Not everyone will, but I can. That evening, Dutch closed his store early and walked to Eli's cabin. He carried a bottle of whiskey, good stuff, not the cheap kind. Figured you might need this, Dutch said. Big day tomorrow. They sat on Eli's porch, passing the bottle between them. Whiskey lay at their feet, content. The sun set over the Montana hills, painting the sky in shades of fire. You know what you're getting into tomorrow? Dutch asked. Not entirely, but I know it needs doing. Town's going to be divided. Some will appreciate what you're doing. Others will think you're defending someone who let innocent people suffer. I know. And you're doing it anyway. I am. Dutch took a drink and handed the bottle back. You're a better man than most, Eli Banner. Sarah chose well. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. 2 old men who'd lived long enough to know that right and wrong weren't always clear, that good people made bad choices, and that sometimes the best you could do was speak your truth and let the chips fall where they would. The night before the meeting, Eli couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Thomas Banner in this same cabin, in this same bed maybe, carrying the weight of his secret. Had Thomas lain awake like this? Had he questioned his choice? Had he wished for a different path? Eli got up and made coffee, sat at the table with Sarah's letter and his own letter, reading them both by lamplight. 2 letters, 2 people trying to do right in impossible circumstances. 2 attempts to turn tragedy into something bearable. Whiskey padded over and rested his chin on Eli's knee. Simple comfort from a simple creature. The dog who'd started all of this with his digging, completely unaware of the human complexities he'd uncovered. Tomorrow changes everything, Eli told the dog. For better or worse, the truth comes out. People will know. People will judge. And we'll all have to live with it. Whiskey's tail wagged slightly. As far as the dog was concerned, as long as there was food and walks and his person nearby, everything was fine. Eli envied that simplicity. But he was human, and humans carried the burden of moral complexity. The burden of knowing that every choice affected others. The burden of trying to balance competing goods and lesser evils. He read his letter one final time, made a small edit clarifying one phrase. Then he folded it and placed it back in his jacket pocket. Tomorrow, he'd stand in front of his town, the town he'd lived in for 12 years, the town that had given him shelter when he lost everything else. He'd speak for a dead man who couldn't speak for himself. He'd ask for understanding in a situation that defied easy answers, and he'd do it knowing that some people would hate him for it, that Teddy Mallory would feel attacked, that some victims' families might feel betrayed, that not everyone would see Thomas Banner's choice as tragic rather than cowardly, but he'd do it anyway, because someone had to, because Thomas deserved a voice, because the full truth, messy and complicated and painful as it was, mattered more than comfortable lies. Outside, the Montana night was cold and clear. Inside, an old cowboy prepared to do the hardest thing he'd ever done. Not because it was easy, not because it would make him popular, but because it was kind, because it was right, because Sarah would have wanted him to, and in the end, that was enough. The community center was packed. Every chair filled, people standing along the walls, more crowded in the doorway. Eli arrived early with whiskey, tying the dog outside, where he could see him through the window. The dog settled on the porch, patient as always. Inside, May was setting up a projector and screen at the front of the room. The state investigator, a woman named Sarah Chen, which made Eli's heart ache with the coincidence, stood nearby with a briefcase full of documents. Vernon Pitch sat in the front row, his hands clasped tight between his knees. Hannah Brennan sat 3 rows back, her father Carl beside her, surprisingly alert for once. Dutch Hammond stood near the back, arms crossed, his face unreadable. And there, near the door, with an angry set to his jaw, was Teddy Mallory. May called the meeting to order at 7 o'clock sharp. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "After 63 years, we finally have answers about the 1962 bank robbery. Investigator Chen will present the findings." Sarah Chen stepped forward. She was professional, efficient, mid-50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She connected her laptop to the projector. On October 3rd of this year, Eli Banner's dog discovered a buried wagon in the public woods outside Dustwater. Subsequent investigation confirmed this was the first bank of Dustwater's transport wagon. Stolen on September 22, 1962. The robbery resulted in 3 deaths, bank guards Kenneth Brennan and Thomas Sullivan, and bystander Margaret Chen, my grandmother. A murmur ran through the room. Chen continued, her voice steady despite the personal connection. 4 men were suspected but never charged. James Patrick Mallory, Thomas Banner, Robert Pitch, and Samuel Cruz. All 4 died within 3 years of the robbery. The case remained unsolved until 2 weeks ago, when Mr. Banner discovered additional evidence. She clicked to the first slide. A photograph of the brass compass, green with corrosion, the initials JPM, clearly visible. This compass, found 3 feet from the buried wagon, belonged to James Mallory. It places him at the burial site. But more significant evidence came from Thomas Banner's personal journal, discovered in Mr. Banner's property, the former Banner residence. Another click. The journal appeared on screen, Thomas's handwriting magnified for everyone to see. Jen read the first entry aloud. October 15th, 1962. Everything is falling apart. They think I was involved. Me and Robert and Samuel and Jimmy. 4 of us who knew the wagon's schedule. 4 of us who could have planned it. But only 1 of us who did. Vernon Pitch leaned forward, his entire body rigid. Chen continued reading. I know it was Jimmy. I saw him 3 days before it happened, nervous, distracted. I saw the guilt in his eyes the day after, before anyone even knew the money was missing. I know because Jimmy is my friend, was my friend. The room was absolutely silent. Chen clicked through more pages, reading key passages. Thomas's anguish at watching innocent men suffer. His struggle with protecting his sister Margaret from the truth about her husband. His slow death from the weight of his secret. When she read the final entry, "Jimmy's burden is buried where the old oak grows crooked," several people gasped. The location Whiskey had found, the exact spot Thomas had cryptically documented. Based on this evidence, Chen concluded, we have definitively determined that James Patrick Mallory acted alone in the 1962 robbery and murders. Thomas Banner, Robert Pitch, and Samuel Cruz are cleared of all suspicion. The case is officially closed. Vernon Pitch stood abruptly, his face wet with tears. My father was innocent. After 60 years, my father is officially innocent. Yes, sir, Chen said gently. Your father was innocent, as was Thomas Banner, as was Samuel Cruz. We're deeply sorry it took this long to prove it. Hannah Brennan stood next. And James Mallory? He's definitively guilty. Yes, ma'am. The evidence is conclusive. Every head turned toward Teddy Mallory. He stood there, face flushed, fists clenched. For a moment, Eli thought he might storm out. But instead, Teddy's shoulders sagged. My grandfather was a murderer, he said, his voice rough. That's what you're telling me. My whole family, we're descended from a murderer. I'm sorry, Chen said. I know this is difficult. Difficult? Teddy's laugh was bitter. I came here thinking I had a claim to that money, thinking it was rightfully mine through inheritance. And instead I find out my grandfather killed 3 people for it. He looked around the room. You were right. All of you. It's blood money. And my family has no right to any of it. He walked out. The room watched him go, the door swinging shut behind him. May stepped forward. Before we discuss what happens next with the recovered funds, Eli Banner has asked to speak. He has something to say about Thomas Banner. Eli stood, his legs unsteady. He made his way to the front, pulled the letter from his pocket with shaking hands. The paper crinkled in the silence. My name is Eli Banner, he began, his voice rough. I've lived in Dustwater for 12 years. In all that time, I didn't know I was living in Thomas Banner's house. Didn't know we shared a last name, though we're only distantly related. Didn't know anything about the man until 2 weeks ago. He unfolded the letter, the pages rustling loud in the quiet room. But now I know, and I think the town should know too. Not just that Thomas was innocent of the robbery, but why he stayed silent when he could have cleared his name. Eli began to read. His voice steadied as he went, the words flowing. He read about Thomas's impossible choice, about a man who loved his sister enough to protect her from devastating truth, even at the cost of his own reputation and ultimately his life. But how silence can be both a cruelty and a kindness, depending on who's counting the cost. Thomas Banner wasn't a hero, Eli read from his letter. But he wasn't a villain either. He was a man caught in an impossible position, trying to balance competing goods and lesser evils. He chose to protect one person from unbearable knowledge, and in doing so allowed 3 families to suffer under false suspicion. That wasn't right, but it was human. He looked up from the page, meeting eyes around the room. Vernon's wet with tears. Hannah's thoughtful and sad. Dutch's understanding. Others harder to read, faces showing confusion or anger or sympathy. I'm asking this town to officially acknowledge Thomas Banner's innocence, Eli continued. Not to excuse his silence, but to recognize it for what it was. A tragic choice made with good intentions that nonetheless caused real harm. I'm asking us to remember that he paid for that choice with his life. His heart gave out at 43 from the stress and guilt of carrying an impossible burden. He folded the letter carefully. Thomas Banner deserves to have his name cleared, just like Robert Pitch and Samuel Cruz, just like all the innocent people whose lives were destroyed by this tragedy. That's all I'm asking. Just acknowledgement. Just truth. The silence stretched. Then Vernon Pitch stood. I've been angry at Thomas Banner since I learned he knew the truth, Vernon said, his voice carrying across the room. Angry that he could have saved my father, saved my family, and chose not to. But Eli's right. Thomas Banner wasn't evil. He was human. He made a choice I can't agree with, but one maybe I can understand. Vernon's voice broke. My father's innocent. After 60 years, that's proven. That's enough. I don't need to hate Thomas Banner to honor Robert Pitch's memory. Hannah Brennan stood next. My father died because of James Mallory's greed. Thomas Banner didn't pull the trigger. He just tried to protect someone he loved. I can't blame him for that, even if I wish he'd made a different choice. One by one, others stood, offering opinions, sharing feelings, working through the complexity of a situation that had no clean answers. And through it all, Eli stood at the front of the room, having spoken his truth, having asked for what he believed was right. Whether the town would grant it remained to be seen. The discussion went on for another hour. People shared memories of the 4 suspects, of the victims, of how the robbery had shaped Dustwater's history. Some voices were angry, others sad, all of them honest. Eventually May called for order again. We need to address the practical question. The recovered funds. Under Montana law, Eli Banner, as the finder, has the strongest legal claim. But there are other considerations. Moral, ethical, community-based. Eli, do you want to speak to this? Eli nodded and stepped forward again. His heart was pounding, but his voice came out steady. I don't want the money, he said simply. Never did. That money cost 3 lives and destroyed 4 families. Taking it for myself, I couldn't sleep at night knowing where it came from. So what do you propose? This from Marcus Webb, the lawyer, who'd been sitting quietly in the middle of the room. I propose we use it to heal instead of harm. Divide it among the families of the victims. Establish a memorial that tells the true story, clears the names of the innocent. Maybe set aside some for a community fund, something ongoing that benefits everyone. That's a significant amount of money to give away, Webb said. Over $300,000 with inflation and interest. Are you certain? I'm certain. And if I told you that legally you could keep it all? That your claim would likely hold up in court? Then I'd say legal doesn't always mean right. A woman near the front stood. Eli recognized her vaguely, one of Samuel Cruz's daughters, living in the next town over. She'd driven in for the meeting. My father was one of the accused, she said. Samuel Cruz. He died of pneumonia in 1964. He was 45. My mother always said the stress weakened him, made him susceptible. I was 10 when we buried him. She paused. If there's money to be distributed, his family has as much claim as anyone. He suffered because of this. The money came from a crime, Hannah Brennan said gently. Should we profit from what James Mallory stole? Should we suffer twice, once from false accusation, once from being excluded from restitution? The discussion threatened to fragment again. May raised her hand for silence. Let me propose something, she said. We form a committee. Representatives from each affected family, victims and falsely accused, plus neutral community members. They work with the county attorney and the state to determine fair distribution. No one person decides. We do this together as a community. Nods around the room. Vernon spoke up. I'll serve on that committee, representing my father's memory. I'll serve, Hannah said. For my father. Sarah Chen, the investigator, raised her hand. You'll serve for my grandmother, Margaret Chen. Others volunteered. The Cruz daughter, a grandson of Thomas Sullivan, one of the murdered guards. Dutch Hammond as a neutral longtime resident. Within minutes, the committee was formed. Now, May said, looking at Eli, we need your formal statement, your legal relinquishment of finder's rights. Are you prepared to sign that? Eli's attorney, not Webb, but a woman named Patricia Morse from Helena who specialized in estate law and had offered her services pro bono. After hearing the story, stood and approached with a document. This is a formal donation pledge, Morse explained. It states that Eli Banner, as the legal finder of the recovered property, voluntarily relinquishes all personal claim to the funds. Instead, he designates the money for distribution as determined by the community committee. With oversight from the county attorney's office, she handed the document to Eli. He read it carefully, making sure he understood every word. It was simple, clear, legally binding. Once he signed, he gave up any right to the money, forever. He thought about Sarah's letter still in his pocket. Do what's kind, not what's easy. This was kind. This was right. This was what she would have wanted. He pulled out a pen and signed his name. The scratch of ink on paper seemed loud in the quiet room. When he finished, he handed the document back to Morse. Witnessed and accepted, Morse said. She passed the document to May, who signed as official witness, then to the committee members, who each added their signatures. When the last signature was added, spontaneous applause broke out. Not everyone joined in. Some faces still showed skepticism or confusion, but enough people clapped that the sound filled the room. Eli felt something release in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying since Whiskey first started digging. It was done. The decision was made. The money was no longer his burden to carry. Vernon Pitch approached, hand extended. Eli shook it, feeling the strength in the old mechanic's grip. "Thank you," Vernon said simply. "For everything. For finding the truth. For speaking for my father. For being decent." Hannah came next, and to Eli's surprise, she hugged him. "You did right," she whispered. Sarah would be proud. Others approached, shaking his hand, offering thanks or understanding or simply acknowledgement. Not everyone was happy. He saw a few people leave without speaking. Their faces closed, but most seemed to recognize that this was the best possible outcome in an impossible situation. Finally, the crowd began to disperse. May started packing up the projector. The committee members gathered to schedule their first meeting. Life moved forward, the way it always did, even after monumental moments. Eli slipped outside to check on Whiskey. The dog was exactly where he'd left him, tail wagging at the sight of his person. Eli untied the leash and sat down on the porch steps. Whiskey settled beside him, warm and solid and uncomplicated. Dutch came out a few minutes later and sat on Eli's other side. "You gave away a fortune tonight," Dutch said. "I gave away a curse." There's a difference. Most people wouldn't see it that way. Most people aren't 67 years old, with nothing left to prove and nobody to leave money to. Eli scratched Whiskey's ears. "Besides, I've got what I need. This dog, this town, enough to get by. What else is there?" Dutch was quiet for a moment. Sarah really did choose well. They sat together in the cool evening air, watching people leave the community center, some in groups, talking animatedly. Others alone, lost in thought, all of them carrying pieces of the truth now. Pieces they'd integrate into their understanding of their town and its history. Inside, May and the committee members were still talking, planning, working out details. The money would take months to distribute properly. Legal challenges might arise. Nothing was certain, except that the process had begun, and it was as fair and transparent as they could make it. Eli stood, his knees protesting. "Come on, Whiskey. Let's go home." The dog bounded up, ready for the walk. Dutch stood too. "Want company?" "Always." They walked through Dustwater's quiet streets, Whiskey trotting ahead, Dutch and Eli following at the pace of old men who'd seen enough of life to know that rushing rarely helped. The town looked the same as always, weathered buildings, dark windows, the skeleton of what it used to be. But something felt different. Lighter, maybe, like a weight had been lifted. At his cabin, Eli said goodnight to Dutch and went inside. He built a fire, made tea, and sat at his table with Sarah's letter. He read it one more time, her words as clear and true as they'd been the day she wrote them. "I did it," he told her ghost. "I did what was kind. I hope it was right." The fire crackled. Whiskey snored. And Eli Banner, having given away a fortune he never wanted, felt richer than he'd felt in years. 3 months later, on a cold January morning with snow threatening the sky, Dustwater gathered at the oak grove for the memorial dedication. The committee had worked quickly and with surprising harmony. The funds were divided, 40% to the families of Kenneth Brennan, Thomas Sullivan, and Margaret Chen, 20% split among the families of the falsely accused, Robert Pitch, Thomas Banner, and Samuel Cruz. The remaining 40% went into a community trust, designated for scholarships and town improvements, administered by a board of local residents. Hannah Brennan quit her second job. She could afford to keep her father's house now, fix the roof, replace the old furnace. More than that, she could breathe easier. The constant weight of financial struggle lifted for the first time in years. Vernon Pitch used his portion to restore his father's grave marker, replacing the simple stone with a proper monument that read, Robert James Pitch, 1919-1964, devoted father and husband. Falsely accused, now vindicated. May his name be remembered with honor. The Cruz family did something similar. The 3 Sullivan grandchildren established a scholarship in their grandfather's name, and Teddy Mallory, after weeks of silence, drove back to Dustwater one afternoon and found Eli at Dutch's store. I wanted to apologize, Teddy said, hat in his hands, for how I acted, for thinking I deserved that money, for everything. You don't need to apologize, Eli said. I do. My grandfather killed 3 people. My family has been living off his memory without knowing what he really was. That money, you were right. It's blood money. I had no right to it. They talked for a while, Teddy sharing what he'd learned about his family history, about Margaret Mallory and how she'd died never knowing the truth. About Thomas Banner's sacrifice to protect her. He loved her, Teddy said quietly. My great-uncle Thomas. He loved his sister enough to die protecting her from the truth. That's something, I guess. It's something, Eli agreed. Now standing in the oak grove with the whole town gathered around, Eli watched as May pulled the cloth from the memorial. It was simple but dignified, a bronze plaque mounted on a granite stone. Positioned near where the wagon had been buried, the plaque read, In memory of those lost to violence, September 22, 1962, Kenneth Brennan, 1920-1962, Thomas Sullivan, 1924-1962, Margaret Chen, 1901-1962, 3 lives stolen, never forgotten, in honor of those falsely accused later. Vindicated by truth, Robert James Pitch, 1919-1964, Thomas Edward Banner, 1963, Samuel Cruz, 1964, innocent. Men who bore unjust suspicion, may their names be cleared forever. May truth bring peace that time could not. Hannah Brennan stepped forward and placed white roses at the base of the memorial. One for each of the dead. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady when she spoke. My father died doing his job, protecting something he believed in. He didn't know that mourning would be his last. Didn't get to say goodbye to me or my mother. But I know he died brave, and I know now, finally, who took him from us. That's more than we had before. That's peace of a kind. Vernon placed a single red rose next to the white ones. My father died in shame he didn't deserve. But his name is clear now. His grandchildren know the truth. That's all I wanted. That's everything. Others came forward. Sarah Chen for her grandmother, the Cruz family, the Sullivan family. Each adding flowers, each saying a few words, each participating in the community act of remembering and honoring, and finally letting go. When it was Eli's turn, he had no flowers to place. Instead, he knelt and brushed snow from the bronze, making sure Thomas Banner's name was clearly visible. I never knew you, he said quietly, but I lived in your house, slept in your bed, walked the same floors, and now I know your story. Know you tried to do right in an impossible situation. Know you paid for it with everything you had. I hope you rest easier now. I hope wherever you are, you know the truth finally came out, that the innocent are vindicated, that your sister lived her whole life never knowing what you protected her from. Maybe that's the happy ending you wanted. He stood, knees protesting the cold, and stepped back. May said a few words about truth and healing and moving forward. The pastor from First Baptist offered a prayer, and then it was done. The memorial was dedicated. The past was officially acknowledged, honored, and laid to rest. People drifted away in small groups. Eli noticed Vernon and Hannah talking quietly, 2 people who'd been on opposite sides now finding common ground. The Cruz daughter shaking hands with one of Thomas Sullivan's grandchildren. Old wounds not healed completely, they never would be, but at least acknowledged. At least treated. Dutch walked with Eli back toward town, whiskey trotting between them as always. You did a good thing, Dutch said. Started a healing that was 60 years overdue. Whiskey did the good thing. He just dug a hole, and you made sure what came out of that hole helped instead of hurt. That was the hard part. Back at the cabin, Eli made his customary coffee and sat on the porch despite the cold. Whiskey settled at his feet. The woods beyond looked peaceful, the oak grove hidden from view, but present in Eli's mind. The wagon was long gone, excavated and preserved in a state archive. The money was distributed. The memorial was erected. The story, as much as it could be, was complete. He pulled Sarah's letter from his pocket. He carried it everywhere now, the paper soft from repeated folding and unfolding. Read it one more time, do what's kind, not what's easy. He'd done that. Had given away a fortune, spoken for a dead man, helped a town heal from a 60-year-old wound. It hadn't been easy. There were still people who thought he was a fool for giving up the money. Still people who thought Thomas Banner didn't deserve defending. Still complexity and disagreement and unresolved feelings, but the wounds were cleaner now. The truth was known. The innocent were vindicated, and the money that had cost so much was finally being used for good, instead of greed. That evening, May stopped by with news. The state had officially closed the case. James Patrick Mallory was listed as the sole perpetrator. Thomas Banner, Robert Pitch, and Samuel Cruz were formally cleared. It would go into the historical record that way. Future generations researching Dustwater's history would know the truth. You made that possible, May said, by finding the journal. By speaking up, by doing the hard thing. I had good teachers, Eli said, thinking of Sarah. After May left, he sat with whiskey by the fire. The dog was getting old, they both were, graying around the muzzle, moving a little slower each month. But they were together, they were comfortable, and they were content. Eli thought about legacy, about what people left behind when they went. Thomas Banner had left a cabin and a secret. Sarah had left love and wisdom. What would Eli leave? Maybe just this. The knowledge that when faced with an impossible choice, he'd tried to do what was kind, that he'd put community over profit, healing over harm, truth over comfort, that he'd used what little power he had, the power of being the finder, the power of having a voice to help instead of hurt. That was enough. That was more than enough. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and quiet, covering the town in white. Inside, by the fire, an old cowboy and his faithful dog settled in for the night. The past was finally at rest. The present was peaceful. And the future, whatever time remained, would be lived with a clear conscience and a light heart. Sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. But when truth finally surfaces, when justice is served and wounds are acknowledged, it sets everyone free. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to move forward. Enough to heal, and in a small Montana town called Dustwater, on a cold January night with snow falling gentle as grace, that was all anyone could ask for.